Market on Close. I'm Caroline Woods in for Oliver Rennick for a look at the world of sustainable investing. I'm joined by Bonnie Schneider, Tech Strong analyst at the Futurum Group. Bonnie, thanks so much for joining the show.
Oh, great to be here, Caroline. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. So, Bonnie, I'm curious. ESG investing has certainly kind of fallen out of favor from a market perspective. How important is sustainability right now for businesses?
Well, I just interviewed over 100 executives over the past year and a half or so, and sustainability is still important, and it's coming into a different reason. I think when the movement first started, it was based on having a moral clarity. We're going to be more sustainable. But now with the surge demand of power from AI, it represents being more efficient. And when you're more efficient, you're more economical. So you're able to save more money. So if it's cost effective, that's also helping to prove the trend to be continuing. So I think we're seeing really incredible innovations using AI to identify areas of greater efficiency, eliminate redundancy, and improve operations. And that is really what's the key driving sustainability right now from the executives that I've interviewed for my recent report.
So this is all about finding value and finding inefficiencies, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And then correcting them in real time. And that's one of the key things that we're seeing in data centers, relying on renewable energy, for example, and identifying the best opportunities to optimize the renewable power outlet. That's really all part of what we're seeing when it comes to really mitigating the impacts of that we're seeing with AI. Now, of course, this is a changing situation, and the projections for power demand for AI are enormous, as I'm sure you're aware. But interesting modifications that are happening with companies that are optimizing data centers. Let's say in the case of a Paris-based company I interviewed, Platform SH, they're talking about having a discount for people using a data center in Quebec. Why Quebec? Because they're near lakes and that can generate hydropower. So sometimes the incentive for cost also is found for the customer as well when they're choosing what to do for cloud providers.
So it's sort of a different take on sustainability then. It's more about how can we save money versus how can we save the environment. Is there still an environmental aspect to it?
Absolutely, Carolyn. I think that's really the key because it's combining both of these at the same time. If it can be cost efficient and, of course, help the environment, that's a win-win situation. And we're seeing that as well when it comes to mitigating impacts of climate change. When we're seeing wildfires, for example, we just had the terrible bout of it in the Southern California area. And anytime you have fires with climate change, the factor can be that they add, unfortunately, more dry conditions and really just optimize conditions to have worse effects of climate change, like more extreme weather outcomes. So using some of these clean tech and climate tech solutions are fascinating because they're using drones and calculating images to identify where the first spark might occur, where it may impact a power line. So this way, the response time can be faster and we can mitigate that risk. Now, that's happening across the board when it comes to climate impacts that are related to extreme weather, for flooding, for extreme heat. So we're seeing AI step in that area as well as we're dealing with a warmer planet and some of the impacts of that.
This isn't the Trump administration, though. It doesn't seem like climate change is very much a top priority for them. So I guess how could policy changes impact these priorities?
Well, I think the biggest area right now of focus are these tariffs because some are in effect, some are coming into March and April, and we'll see, of course, this is a changing situation. But it's interesting because when it comes to EV materials, solar panels, absolutely, there's an impact in pricing for anything coming out of China right now. Some companies have shifted and kind of responded to this in real time, shifting manufacturing supplies to other areas of Southeast Asia into Vietnam or Malaysia. And we're also potentially going to see, I think, the longer term impact, which is really interesting because as we tend to see more US-based manufacturing with the US building of data centers across Texas and Ohio and places like that, while that is going to bring a huge demand for energy, we're also seeing a bit of a sustainability impact, right? Because we're seeing less transport, and that, of course, reduces emissions. So it's a double-edged sword, like many of these things.
So what's the takeaway for investors right now, just in terms of looking to capitalize on these shifts, and how do they invest in it?
Well, I would say a few things to keep in mind is looking not just at the sustainability policy and the goals. Of course, many of the big tech companies all have goals for it to be net zero in within just a few years. But I think that part of the takeaway is to look at a different areas in the circularity. How are they processing products, going for a refurbishing to renewing and things like that? That's a key factor to consider when it comes to product output. And also, as I indicated in my recent report, there's the human factor. There's a representation of groups like women, for example, in AI, which are underrepresented, and some groups are working to change that in terms of recruiting. And then there's that whole area of climate tech, which is really fascinating, like carbon capture and other areas to mitigate risk of climate change, but really right at the heart of it. So I'd say that looking at those areas are key for investors to see how is the company's holistic view of sustainability, not just isolated to emissions. And also, I want to mention the regulations that are coming into effect. We have the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive now in effect, and that's impacting all European companies and in the US, large companies that are doing a large portion of their business in Europe are also impacted. And plus, in California, we have laws around what's called Scope 3 emissions, which are emissions across the supply chain. Those are external emissions that you might not be doing directly, but if someone in your supply chain it does impact your Scope 3 reporting. So all of that comes into play. We have evolving, intensifying regulations globally as well. And some of the interesting technology is to not just mitigate the risk, but to track it. How do you track all this data when you have to report it and it's mandatory? So we're seeing innovative tools and solutions to do that as well.
So Bonnie, are you making the case for ESG investing to make a comeback here?
I think that there's always going to be a demand for sustainable investing. I think that people want to feel good about their investments as well as making them a strong case for investing. So I think that as we get more into this AI age and data centers and things like that, I think there will be the ESG focus, but also on efficiency, energy efficiency, innovative ways to create resources to lean into renewable energy and things like that. So it's all evolving, as I mentioned. But regardless of that, we have these global mandates that are happening that are impacting, and we're seeing more of an increase of that globally, if not in the U.S. Anyone doing business in Europe, for example, knows that as well.
Yeah, certainly, although we'll see if those change at all. Bonnie Schneider, tech strong analyst at the Futurum Group, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Caroline.